Hong Kong. Summer, 1971. The air inside the underground gym smelled like wet concrete, cigarette ash, and old blood. Not metaphorical blood either. Real blood. Dried into canvas corners. Pressed into cracked floorboards beneath thousands of boots. The kind of room where men stopped speaking softly the second they walked in. Around 200 people packed the lower level that night. Dock workers, triad associates, American sailors on shore leave, gamblers from Colin, a few off-duty cops pretending not to be cops. Everybody sweating through cheap shirts while ceiling fans pushed hot air in tired circles. And at the center of it all sat a man people called the prison monster. 500 pounds. Maybe more. Depends who told the story later. Some swore he was 480. Others said 520. One witness insisted the scale stopped working at 500 exactly and the owner just laughed and rounded down. But nobody argued about the size of him. You saw him once. You remembered forever. His neck folded over itself like stacked leather. Fingers thick as pork ribs. One eye permanently swollen from a prison fight in Manila years earlier. He had survived riots, stabbings, 3 men jumping him in a Cebu prison shower with sharpened spoons. That story followed him everywhere. And that night, in a basement beneath Nathan Road, he made an offer. $50,000 to anyone who could survive 15 seconds. Not beat him, survive him. The room erupted when he said it. Men laughing nervously, chairs scraping. Somebody dropped a beer bottle near the back wall, and nobody even turned around, because everyone kept staring at the giant seated beneath the naked overhead bulb. 15 seconds, that was all. The prison monster slapped the cash onto a wooden table. Hong Kong dollars stacked in thick paper bands. Enough money to change a man's life in 1971. Enough money to make desperate people stupid. And people were desperate. 3 men had already tried earlier that week. One lasted 11 seconds. One lasted 7. The last guy, a Muay Thai fighter from Bangkok, apparently lasted closer to 13 before getting carried upstairs with his shoulder hanging wrong. Witnesses argued over the details for years. Some said dislocated. Some said broken clean through. Doesn't matter now. What mattered was the silence that settled over the room after the giant finished speaking. Nobody moved. Nobody volunteered. Not at first, because survival looked impossible when seated across from 500 pounds of prison violence. Then someone near the staircase started laughing quietly. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just amused. A few heads turned. At first nobody recognized him. Small frame, black shirt damp from humidity, slim shoulders, hands resting casually in pockets, barely around 135 pounds, maybe 140 after dinner. Standing near a support column like he'd wandered into the wrong building by accident. Bruce Lee, though half the room didn't know it yet. That happens in old stories. People remember fame backwards. They imagine the world instantly recognizing legends the moment they entered a room. But in 1971 Hong Kong, Bruce Lee was famous in certain circles, invisible in others, especially underground fighting circles, especially among Western sailors and prison gamblers. One American reportedly leaned toward another and muttered, "That skinny Chinese kid gonna get himself killed." And maybe that sentence survived because it perfectly captured the room. Nobody feared Bruce Lee at first glance. That was always the mistake. Bruce stepped closer to the table, slowly, calmly, ceiling fan clicking overhead. Somewhere upstairs traffic rolled through Kowloon streets while neon light leaked through cracks in the stairwell door. The prison monster looked down at him and laughed immediately. Not insulted laughter, confused laughter. Like reality itself had presented him a joke. "You," the giant said. Witnesses disagree on Bruce Lee's exact response. Some say he smiled first. Some say he touched the money. Some say he looked directly at the giant's swollen eye before answering. But almost everyone remembers one sentence. 4 seconds is enough. And suddenly, the room changed temperature. Not literally, emotionally, because confidence can alter air pressure when it's real enough. A few men laughed. Others didn't. Bruce Lee removed his watch carefully and handed it to someone beside him. Small detail. But details survive because they reveal intention. A man expecting chaos doesn't remove a watch gently. A man expecting precision does. The prison monster stood, and God, People remembered that part vividly. Chair legs screaming against concrete, wood cracking beneath his weight, his full height unfolding slowly like something industrial waking up, sweat stains dark beneath his arms, prison tattoos blurred by stretched skin, 500 pounds, against Bruce Lee, around 135. The math felt insulting. Someone near the back started counting seconds aloud before the fight even began. One, mocking him already. Bruce rolled his shoulders once. Tiny movement, almost lazy. But witnesses later described something strange about his expression. No anger, no fear, no performance, just observation. Like Bruce Lee wasn't looking at a monster, he was studying timing. And that difference mattered. Because while everybody else saw 500 pounds, Bruce Lee saw balance. The betting started before either man touched each other. That's how those underground rooms worked in Kowloon back then. Men smelled opportunity faster than danger. Cigarette smoke thickened near the ceiling while cash moved hand to hand through the crowd. Somebody shouted odds in Cantonese. Somebody else argued in English. One drunk sailor offered 3-1 Bruce Lee wouldn't stay conscious past 10 seconds. Nobody took that bet. Too generous. The smarter gamblers were arguing about how the giant would finish it. Bear hug? Head smash? One old dockworker near the wall kept repeating the same sentence under his breath. If the big one grabs him once, finished. And honestly, it sounded reasonable. The prison monster outweighed Bruce Lee by almost 360 pounds, maybe more. In modern terms, it sounded absurd. Cartoonish even. But underground fighting stories from that era were filled with men built from prison years, dock labor, bad food, scar tissue and survival instincts. Different kind of human weight. Heavy in the bones, heavy in the eyes. Bruce Lee stepped onto the stained canvas platform without ceremony. No stretching routine, no dramatic stance. Just light footwork, loose shoulders. The kind of movement people underestimated because it didn't look aggressive. That happened constantly with Bruce Lee. He didn't move like fighters expected fighters to move. He moved like water trying not to spill. The prison monster cracked his neck once. Loud enough several witnesses remembered the sound decades later. Thick saliva hit the floor when he spat near Bruce's shoes. "You got family?" the giant asked. Bruce tilted his head slightly. "Why? So, they know why you died." Some people swear the room laughed. Others insist nobody laughed, because tension had already become too heavy by then. Memory changes under pressure. That's the strange thing about oral history. Fear edits details differently for everyone. But one thing every witness agreed on. Bruce Lee smiled. Tiny smile, almost sympathetic. The referee, if you could call him that, stepped between them holding a cheap stopwatch. Short man. Nervous eyes. Shirt sticking to his back from sweat. He explained the rules quickly. 15 seconds. If Bruce Lee stayed standing or conscious, he won the money. No weapons, no outside interference. And then came the detail people rarely mention in retellings. The prison monster requested no kicking. That part mattered, because even then, even before international fame exploded, some fighters had heard whispers about Bruce Lee's kicks, fast enough to blur, strong enough to crack ribs through guards. The giant pointed one thick finger, kicking. Bruce looked at him for a second, then nodded. Okay, no argument, no ego. Just agreement. That should have scared people more than it did. Because dangerous men usually negotiate. Bruce Lee adapted. The crowd tightened inward around the platform. Around 200 witnesses compressed shoulder to shoulder beneath flickering yellow lights. Humidity clung to skin like wet cloth. Beer, tobacco, cheap cologne, damp concrete. Somebody coughing near the stairwell non-stop. The stopwatch man raised his arm. Silence spread unevenly. Not full silence. The nervous kind. Shoes scraping. Quiet whispers. Someone muttering prayers in Cantonese. Bruce Lee bounced lightly once. The giant planted his feet. And for the first time all night, the prison monster stopped smiling. Maybe he noticed Bruce's eyes. People always mentioned Bruce Lee's eyes afterward. Too calm. That was the unsettling part. Not intensity, absence of doubt. The signal came. The giant moved first. Explosive isn't the right word because people imagine speed. This wasn't speed. This was mass. 500 pounds launching forward with ugly momentum. The wooden platform groaned underneath him. Witnesses near the front later claimed they felt vibration through their shoes. One grab, that was all he needed. Bruce pivoted instantly, not backward, sideways, tiny angle. Barely visible unless you knew what you were watching, and suddenly, the giant missed. Not by inches, by certainty. That's what stunned people. The prison monster expected resistance, panic, retreat. Instead, Bruce Lee vanished from the line of attack before the attack fully formed. Second one. Bruce stepped inside. Fast. Too fast for half the audience to process cleanly. A sharp vertical strike hit the giant's throat. Not enough to finish him, enough to interrupt breathing. The giant stumbled once, confused more than hurt. Third second, Bruce hit again. Body shot. Precise. Violent. Short. No wasted movement. Witnesses described hearing a sound like a sack dropping wet cement. Others remembered the giant's face changing color instantly. Anatomical damage. Solar plexus disruption. Air collapsing inward. But the terrifying part wasn't the power. It was efficiency. Bruce Lee wasn't fighting emotionally. He was solving. Fourth second. The prison monster swung wildly. Huge right hand. If it landed, maybe Bruce dies right there. Some witnesses believed that forever. A 500-pound man doesn't need perfect technique to destroy bone. Physics alone becomes horrifying at that size. But Bruce was already moving. Left foot pivot, shoulder turn, intercepting fist, straight blast, 3 strikes, maybe 4, some say 5. Nobody agrees completely because human eyes fail under extreme speed. Even trained fighters later admitted they lost visual continuity during the exchange. All they knew was this: the giant's knees folded. Not dramatically, not cinematic, just disconnected. Like the structure holding him upright suddenly forgot its purpose. 500 pounds crashed onto the platform hard enough to shake beer bottles off nearby tables. And then came the sound nobody forgot. Silence. Pure silence. Because around 200 people simultaneously realized the fight was over before the stopwatch reached 5 seconds. The referee stared downward, frozen. Bruce Lee stepped back calmly, breathing almost normally. The giant tried to rise once. Couldn't. His arms trembled beneath his own weight. Bruce looked at the referee. What time? The man checked the stopwatch with shaking hands. 4 seconds. Not exactly 4, depending who told it later. Some insisted 4.2. Others said closer to 4.6. But history rounded downward because legends prefer clean numbers. And somewhere in that basement beneath Hong Kong neon lights, around 200 witnesses understood they hadn't watched strength lose to strength. They watched certainty lose to precision. For about 3 full seconds after the giant hit the floor, nobody reacted. That detail matters, because crowds normally explode after violence. They cheer, scream, gamble payouts start flying around. But this room, this loud underground basement beneath Nathan Road, went unnaturally still. Like the human brain needed extra time to accept what the eyes had already seen. 500 pounds collapsed in 4 seconds. Bruce Lee standing untouched. The prison monster wheezed against the canvas, one massive hand clawing at his throat. His breathing sounded wrong now. Wet. Interrupted. The earlier confidence had disappeared from his face completely, replaced by something uglier. Confusion. A dock worker near the front whispered, "No, no way." Another man kept staring at Bruce Lee's hands. That became a recurring detail in witness accounts. People expected giant muscles, monster strength, some supernatural size equalizer. Instead, they saw compact forearms, narrow wrists, relaxed fingers. Bruce Lee looked almost delicate standing over a man built like prison machinery. Contradiction disturbed people. That's why the moment lasted. Bruce took 1 step backward as the referee finally found his voice. "Fight finished!" Nobody cheered immediately. Not yet, because the crowd was still calculating reality. Some witnesses later claimed the prison monster tried standing again. Others insist he never fully got up for nearly 2 minutes. But almost everybody agrees on one image: Bruce Lee waiting calmly, not celebrating, not taunting, waiting. That unnerved people more than aggression would have. See? Violent men understand anger. They understand dominance displays, chest pounding, screaming, adrenaline. But Bruce Lee looked emotionally untouched by the whole thing, like he'd completed a task he already solved hours earlier. The stopwatch man kept checking the timer over and over. 4 seconds. he muttered again. 4 seconds! And suddenly the room detonated, shouting, chairs scraping backward, gamblers screaming accusations at each other, cash changing hands violently. One sailor reportedly punched another over a disputed side bet. Near the staircase, somebody started clapping slowly before the entire basement erupted into overlapping noise. But through all of it, Bruce Lee stayed quiet. That detail survived too. A woman working drinks later described him as the calmest person in the building. Strange sentence considering what had just happened, yet multiple witnesses echoed the same feeling. Bruce Lee didn't look victorious. He looked observant. The prison monster finally rolled onto one knee, sweat pouring down his face now. Thick ropes of saliva hanging briefly from his mouth before dripping onto the canvas. His swollen eye blinked rapidly, and then something unexpected happened. He laughed, not loudly, painfully, broken laughter. He pointed weakly toward Bruce Lee while trying to breathe. "What? Are you?" That line appears in almost every version of the story, which usually means some form of it probably happened. Bruce answered immediately. "A student." Simple, almost disappointing, but people remembered it because they expected arrogance, especially after 4 seconds against a man nearly 4 times his size. Instead, Bruce Lee crouched slightly beside him, not mockingly, almost respectfully. Now here's where oral history fractures a little. Some witnesses swear Bruce explained the strikes afterward. Others insist he said almost nothing. One retired gambler claimed Bruce Lee tapped the giant's chest lightly and said, "Big targets break easier." Could be true, could be storytelling inflation added years later. But what definitely happened was this. The prison monster asked Bruce Lee to show him, right there, in front of everyone, and Bruce did. That transformed the entire night from fight story into legend. Bruce pointed first to the throat strike. "Interrupt the structure," he explained. Not destroy, interrupt. That distinction mattered deeply in Bruce Lee's philosophy. People misunderstand his violence because they focus on speed. But Bruce Lee's real obsession was efficiency. Remove unnecessary movement. Remove wasted emotion. Remove resistance itself. The first strike attacked breathing. The second attacked balance. The third attacked recovery, layer by layer, anatomical, physical, philosophical. Bruce demonstrated slowly while the giant listened from the floor. "You were thinking power," Bruce said. Then he tapped his own temple. "I was thinking timing." The basement had gone quiet again. Not fear this time. Attention. Even hardened criminals listened carefully now. Men who'd spent years around fighters suddenly watching combat explained differently than they'd ever heard before. Bruce Lee picked up a beer bottle from a nearby table, cold glass sweating in his hand. "If I break this," he said softly, "people call it strength." Then he placed the bottle down gently. "But if I stop this from falling before gravity finishes," he snapped his fingers. "That is understanding." The room stayed silent. Some didn't fully grasp what he meant. Others never forgot it. Because Bruce Lee wasn't describing fighting anymore. He was describing control. And suddenly the 4-second victory felt larger than violence. The prison monster stared upward at him for several long seconds, chest still rising unevenly. Then came another detail witnesses repeated for decades. The giant offered Bruce the money. All of it. Bruce looked at the stacks on the wooden table. $50,000. Life-changing money in 1971 Hong Kong, and refused. At first nobody understood why. The giant certainly didn't. "You won," Bruce shrugged lightly. "That wasn't survival." Then he pointed toward the crowd. "That was education." Now maybe memory polished that sentence over time. Maybe Bruce phrased it differently. Legends often become more poetic after enough retellings. But something close to it clearly happened, because multiple witnesses described the same emotional shift afterward. The fight stopped being about humiliation. It became revelation. Bruce Lee finally accepted only a small portion of the money, enough to cover bets and expenses according to some accounts, then handed part of it to the injured Thai fighter from earlier in the week. Again, no full agreement on details, but enough overlap exists that historians still mention it quietly in Bruce Lee circles. And while the crowd continued buzzing around him, Bruce moved toward the staircase calmly, slipping his watch back onto his wrist. One sailor reportedly stopped him near the exit. "Hey, Bruce." still stunned. "How'd you know he'd fall?" Bruce paused near the stairwell light, humidity drifting in from the Hong Kong streets above. Then he answered without turning around. Because he already decided to win before he understood the fight. And somehow, that sentence traveled farther than the punches ever did. By midnight, the story had already escaped the basement. That's how Hong Kong worked in the early 1970s. Information traveled through cigarette smoke and taxi windows faster than newspapers could print it. Dockworkers carried stories to harbors. Bartenders carried them to gamblers. Sailors carried them across oceans. By sunrise, versions of the fight were already mutating across Kowloon. Some said Bruce Lee knocked out a 500-pound prison fighter in 7 seconds. Others swore it happened in 3. One version claimed the giant had killed 2 men before meeting Bruce Lee. Another insisted he was undefeated in over 40 underground matches. Truth blurred immediately. But the core survived intact. A massive prison monster challenged the world. Bruce Lee ended it in 4 seconds. And strangely enough, the details people remembered most weren't even the punches. It was the feeling afterward. Witnesses described walking home differently that night. Quiet, thoughtful, disturbed in ways they couldn't explain. One bartender later said, "It felt like seeing speed become intelligence. That sounds dramatic now, maybe even too poetic. But Bruce Lee had that effect on people who saw him live. Film never fully captured it. Cameras of that era struggled with his timing. Frames skipped details. Movements blurred unnaturally. In person, according to witnesses, Bruce Lee felt faster than logic. Not magical, just deeply efficient." The next afternoon, several men from the basement gathered at a noodle stall near Temple Street, still arguing over what they'd seen. Sweat dripping from glass bottles of soda. Steam rising from bowls into the humid air. Every table discussing the same question. How could someone that small generate enough force? An older man sitting near the window finally answered without looking up from his food. He didn't fight the weight. The table went quiet. He fought the movement before the weight arrived. That idea spread quietly through martial arts circles afterward. Because most fighters attacked mass directly. They collided with it, tested strength against strength. Bruce Lee approached combat differently. He treated movement like prediction. Timing like architecture. Destroy structure first. Everything heavy collapses eventually. Around that same time, rumors started reaching Western fighters stationed through Asia, American Marines, boxers, wrestlers, men hearing impossible stories in crowded bars. A 135-pound actor dropped a prison giant in 4 seconds. Most laughed initially, until they heard how many witnesses saw it, 200, maybe more. And witness count matters in stories like this, because mass hallucination is harder to dismiss. Underground fight myths usually collapse under scrutiny. Too few observers, too much alcohol, too many contradictions. But this story survived because even conflicting accounts agreed on the essential truth. Bruce Lee dismantled a man everyone feared. Fast, precise, clinical. Weeks later, and this detail comes from multiple overlapping oral histories. The prison monster apparently visited Bruce Lee privately. No crowd, no gambling, just questions. Imagine that image for a second. 500 pounds sitting quietly across from Bruce Lee in a cramped Hong Kong training room smelling of wood polish and sweat. Afternoon heat pressing against open windows. Traffic humming outside somewhere beyond the alleyways. The giant reportedly asked, "Why couldn't I touch you?" Bruce considered the question carefully, then pointed toward a hanging heavy bag. "If I push that," Bruce said, "it swings." He let the bag settle. "But if I touch it before it moves." Tap, no power. Simple explanation, almost childlike, yet terrifying when understood fully. Bruce Lee believed interception defeated force before force fully existed. That philosophy shaped everything he did. Fighting wasn't collision to him. It was interruption. The prison monster listened silently. Then came another strange detail repeated in several Bruce Lee circles over the years. The giant asked Bruce Lee to teach him, not how to hit, how to think. That distinction matters enormously, because men like the prison monster spent their entire lives believing survival belonged to whoever carried more violence. Bigger fists, bigger muscles, bigger fear. Then Bruce Lee shattered that worldview in 4 seconds, not with rage, with clarity, and clarity is harder to recover from than pain. Bruce reportedly trained with him briefly afterward. Nothing formal. A few sessions, footwork, timing drills, breathing, economy of movement. Witnesses described the giant struggling more with slowness than speed. Bruce kept telling him, "Relax," which sounded absurd, considering the size difference. Relax? Against the world? Against prison instincts carved into muscle memory. But Bruce Lee understood tension exhausts people long before combat begins. The prison monster moved like he carried war inside every joint. Bruce moved like nothing needed proving. That contrast became the real lesson of the story. Not skinny man beats giant. That's too shallow. The deeper lesson was this: one man relied entirely on force, the other understood rhythm, and rhythm changes everything. Years later, some witnesses still argued about whether the story became exaggerated over time. Fair question. Human memory bends toward mythology naturally. Maybe the giant weighed slightly less. Maybe the timing stretched shorter or longer. But even skeptics admitted one thing consistently. Bruce Lee's presence changed rooms. People felt it before understanding it. One retired sailor who witnessed the fight explained it best decades later during an interview in California. Old man by then. Hands shaking slightly while holding coffee. He said, "The crazy part wasn't watching Bruce Lee beat him." Long pause. The crazy part was realizing Bruce already knew exactly how it would end. Bruce Lee never publicly talked much about the fight. That's important, because fake legends usually come attached to loud self-promotion. But people close to Bruce noticed something different about him after underground encounters, like that one. He rarely described victories emotionally, never obsessed over domination, never sat around replaying knockouts the way insecure fighters often do. For Bruce Lee, combat was information, a conversation happening too fast for language. And somewhere beneath Nathan Road in 1971, around 200 witnesses watched him speak fluently while another man only knew how to shout. The prison monster disappeared from underground headlines gradually after that night. Some say he returned to Manila. Others insist he stayed in Hong Kong, working dock security. One rumor claimed he stopped fighting entirely for nearly a year. Nobody knows for certain. That's the problem with old oral histories. People vanish. Buildings get demolished. Witnesses die. Basement gyms become restaurants. Stories survive longer than locations do. But the memory remained, especially among the people who saw it live. A bartender from Kowloon reportedly told the story until the late 1980s, always pausing at the same detail. The giant never even touched him. That part haunted people. 500 pounds. 4 seconds. Not one clean hit landed. Even decades later, martial artists still debated the mechanics behind it. Timing, angle disruption, centerline interception, neurological shock, breath interruption, balance destruction. Bruce Lee students analyzed the exchange frame by frame using reconstructed movements. But technical explanations only captured part of the truth, because the emotional reality mattered just as much. The room believed size guaranteed victory. Bruce Lee didn't. That difference altered everything before the fight even began. Fear changes timing. Expectation slows reaction. Confidence reshapes movement. Bruce understood this instinctively. While other fighters carried tension into combat, Bruce carried observation. He studied people before touching them. Weight distribution, breathing rhythm, emotional impatience, tiny hesitations hidden beneath aggression. The prison monster entered the fight, trying to impose force. Bruce Lee entered trying to remove certainty. And certainty collapsed first. That's why witnesses remembered the silence afterward more than the strikes themselves. Silence means belief systems breaking. One former sailor who attended that night described going home unable to sleep. Not because of violence, because of implication. If Bruce Lee could do that, he said years later, what else was possible? That question followed Bruce everywhere. He shattered assumptions faster than opponents. About race, about size, about what Asian martial artists looked like to Western audiences, about speed, about human potential itself. And maybe that's why stories like the prison monster fight survived when thousands of other underground matches disappeared into history. The event became symbolic. Bigger than the basement. Bigger than gambling money. It represented a moment people watched old rules fail publicly. The strongest man in the room lost to the clearest mind in the room. Simple, brutal, unforgettable. Near the end of his life, Bruce Lee wrote often about honestly expressing oneself. Most people quote that phrase casually now, without understanding how radical it was. Bruce believed artificial tension weakened humans spiritually and physically. The body performed best when ego stopped interrupting action. That philosophy lived inside those 4 seconds. No wasted movement, no performance, no anger, just direct expression, pure response. Like water finding the fastest path downhill. And perhaps the strangest detail of all came from a witness interviewed many years later. Elderly by then. Voice fragile, memory uneven in places. But when asked what he remembered most about Bruce Lee that night, he answered immediately. His face. The interviewer asked what about it. Long pause. Then the old man said quietly, he looked sorry for him. Not frightened, not excited. Sorry. As if Bruce Lee understood something the giant never had. That violence without understanding eventually traps the person carrying it. Maybe that's true. Maybe memory softened Bruce over time into something more philosophical than flesh and blood. Legends tend to drift upward like that, toward meaning, toward myth. But even stripped of exaggeration, the core remains difficult to ignore. A 500-pound prison fighter offered $50,000 to anyone who could survive 15 seconds. Bruce Lee ended it in 4. And more than 50 years later, people still repeat the story for the same reason those 200 witnesses carried it out into the Hong Kong night. Because every once in a while, someone appears who changes the meaning of strength in front of everybody watching. Bruce Lee was one of those people.